around the year 2000, the Pacific cooled off again and will be cooler for another 20 years. So there's been no warming since the Pacific changed back to the cooler phase, and indeed the United States winters are getting more severe. In fact, since '02, the United States winter average temperature has plunged at a rate of 4 degrees per decade. It's getting rapidly colder. The cooler phase of the Pacific Ocean suggests global cooling to a slight degree for the next 20 years. And then there's the sun. The sun emits a solar wind made of highly charged, turns beyond the orbit of Pluto, well beyond that. The sun becomes active with many sunspots for a few years and then quiet for a few years. It's the solar cycle, the sunspot cycle. The average length between the peaks or the troughs is about 11 years. And we've been following these things since 1750. Got a pretty good long-term record. What we find is in the solar maximum, when there's a lot of spots, it lasts about a year or two, numerous sunspots, strong solar wind, and up to 8% more ultraviolet light. But when the sun is quiet, in the minimum for 1 to 2 years, very few sunspots, weak solar wind, and much less ultraviolet light. The weaker solar wind allows many more cosmic rays to enter the atmosphere. This may affect the amount of cloud cover. Now, I'm not going to take a long time on this, but what we've noticed is when the sun is active, it corresponds to warmer periods in the Earth's recent past. And when it's quieter, it corresponds to the Little Ice Age. In fact, from about 1650 to 1720, there were very few sunspots observed, and this was a period known as the Maunder Minimum, the coldest part of the Little Ice Age. Now, this is sunspot cycle 23, which we just came out of. It bottomed out in '08, and this is the new cycle, 24, that's coming. The last solar minimum right here was the longest, 12.7 years, and in 100 years, and had the most days without spots in 200 years. So strong solar wind when you have a lot of sunspots, weaker solar wind when you have very few. Cycle 24 and 25 are predicted to be very weak. And in the past, weak solar wind equals a cooler Earth. We may have 20 to 25 years of a weaker solar wind ahead. So you have to wonder, is a period of global cooling already begun? Today's temperature is not unusually warm when compared to the last 10,000 years. Today's temperature is not unusually warm when compared to the last 1,000 years. Again, the current rate would make us half a degree warmer in 190 years and 7 degrees warmer according to the United Nations. Heat escaping to space is not decreasing, it is increasing. There is no dramatic warming of the upper atmosphere at all. Our real-world measurements show that. Claims that global warming is accelerating, and people actually will say that, are clearly lies to push an agenda, not science. There's been no warming since '98. We have changes in the sun and the oceans that affect climate, and those things say we're not going to have any warming until at least 2030. The long-term temperature has been falling for the last 3,000 years, and if the modern warm period has peaked, then we may be looking at more substantial cooling in the future. If the world as a whole cut all carbon dioxide emissions tomorrow, the average temperature of the planet is not going to drop in several hundred years, perhaps as much as 1,000 years. That was a recent statement from Tim Flannery, one of the climate commissioners in Australia. There is no climate emergency. Some men are weather-wise, most are otherwise. That's what Ben Franklin said. Now, if you're interested in some reading, this is a very good book. It's called Unstoppable Global Warming Every 1,500 Years by Fred Singer. Climate Confusion by Dr. Roy Spencer is also a very, very good and readable book, and quite funny at times. Taken by Storm by Christopher Essex and Ross McKittrick is very good. And if you want to know the politics, Red Hot Lies by Chris Horner is also very good. So, thank you very much. Now I'll try to answer some questions.